Snoop Dogg and Eminem are beefing. Snoop says it's over, but does Eminem agree? Let's get into it.
I think hip hop will always be a voice for the people.
Everybody, I'm Reggie Williams, founder and CEO of Ambrosia for Heads, and with me I have Jake Payne, our editor in chief, and together we are What's the Headline, the podcast. Got an exciting lineup today. This is always one of the more challenging parts of the year. Tends to be dead in the space in terms of new music releases, things like that. And it was always a struggle for us because we'd see others kind of resorting to kind of clickbaity type stuff just to kind of keep the numbers up. And while we wanted to like definitely give heads like good food, we also didn't want to just put trash out just to put it out. But we got some good stuff this week. One of which is kind of an ongoing issue that we'll get into, but another more immediate topic came up right around New Year's Eve, and I think it kind of got lost in the sauce amidst the news that we all received about Doom's passing. But I think it's worth discussing. Two of hip hop's giants, two of the biggest, the greats, have been in a bit of a beef or a feud, and it's one is to be expected. It's kind of a lightning rod for beef. The other one is a bit of a shocker because he kind of tends to stay above the fray and is kind of a big brother or more aptly an uncle to the game. But the two people we're talking about are Snoop Dogg and Eminem. So you wanna run it down? You want me to run down kind of what's
No, I'm happy to. Yeah, so I mean, it actually dates back, in 2020, somewhere around his album campaign, if I'm not mistaken. Snoop went on the Breakfast Club and broke down his top 10 MCs, which, funny enough, at the time, if I'm not mistaken, you and I covered kind of the ambrosia of that because Snoop's list was really dope. I know we at least talked about it because he was giving props to a lot of West Coast OGs that sometimes don't come up in the traditional list. And after that conversation ended, the Breakfast Club team brought up the fact that Eminem was a noteworthy omission from that top 10. And, Snoop spoke something to the fact of, it's just not it for me, where M is at. Is that, you agree with me there in terms
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
timeline?
yeah. I remember watching that Snoop interview real time. It was Breakfast Club. Snoop was remote. I remember distinctly. I was in California watching it, and it was. I remember thinking it was a phenomenal interview because Snoop was always entertaining. And like you said, he ran down his list, and so they asked him if he thought he was in the top 10, and Snoop said he did not make it. He said he actually started off saying that he was near a top 10 rapper.
Mm-hmm.
But then he ultimately said he didn't consider him to be part of his top 10. Charlemagne asked him why, and Snoop said, well, there's some guys in the 80s that Eminem just can't mess with. He said, like Rakim, like Big Daddy Kane, like KRS-One, like LL Cool J, like Ice Cube. And so to me, I saw it not as a diss against M, but as a guy who came out in the early 90s, paying respect to those who came before him and paved the way for him as to who his top 10 would be. It was very personal.
Which is something that Eminem himself has done throughout his career. There was that famous Grammy speech where he shouted out Master Ace and Cool Keith and, a host of guys who I'm not sure have ever necessarily even been invited to the Grammys. And more recently, we see Eminem doing a lot of press in front of his cassette tape collection. M has always been a let me put you on to what inspires me type of MC.
Right. And as we've covered many times, Redman, like is one of the people in particular he pays homage to, as one of his guys. And, Red is dope. We love him. Our audience loves him, but not a lot of people put him in their top 10, but it's M's personal top 10, So,
Mm-hmm.
so I left that interview thinking not about any slight against Eminem, but more so that it was dope that Snoop kind of veered from the typical, like, fill it up with like greats from the 90s top 10 list and really went back to the guys who helped him, and influenced him in his career. But fast forward, Eminem later responded on an expanded version of his deluxe album, Music to Be Murdered By, the song called Zeus. Um, and he had a verse in there or a lyric, and I'll quote it. He says, "As far as squashing beef, I'm used to people knocking me, but just not in my camp. And diplomatic as I'm trying to be, last thing I need is Snoop Dogg in me. Man, dog, you was like a damn god to me. Man, not really, ha ha. I had God backwards." So,
Yeah.
uh, and if you recall, Music to Be Murdered By was, I don't want to say a sequel, but definitely a follow up to his Kamikaze album, which was all about, the whole album was really about going at people who have been going at Eminem. And so,
Joe Budden, Lord Jamar, MGK, etc.
yeah, I mean, yeah, it just goes on and on and on. And so, it's not uncommon for M to address his feelings about things in lyrics. That kind of flew under the radar for me. Were you up on that when that happened?
No, I mean, actually, it was funny. I mean, it was, I think, at the last episode of 2020, if I'm not mistaken, you and I kind of matter of factly dropped the point that Eminem had released an expanded edition of Music to Be Murdered By. Like, and that happened at whether it was early 2021 or late 2020, it happened. I listened to it 1.5 times and kind of moved on from it. And honestly, those lyrics didn't even stick to my ribs.
Yeah, mine neither. Mine neither. But fast forward and Clubhouse, Clubhouse, right? Um, for those
New to
out,
the party, but in the party. Yeah.
right. So for those out there who don't know, Clubhouse is an app that got really popular in 2020. Best way to describe it is it's almost like being able to drop in on panel discussions, and it can be
Like
you
TED
and
Talks.
friends. Yeah, exactly. Or it could be screenwriters and producers, or artists, or whoever it might be. And it's just a collective of people chopping it up, and you can listen, you can participate, and it's become very, very popular, particularly in the hip hop community. So there was a Clubhouse room that was attended by Daz Dillinger, obviously the Dog Pound, Royce, Nori, and Joe Budden. And Daz said that Eminem actually, that Snoop actually had been upset that Eminem had refused to be a guest on a Snoop track. Snoop had invited
Mm-hmm.
him to be part of a song, and Daz says that he took it personally, and that's why you never heard a song from Snoop and Eminem. So this actually didn't start with that Snoop diss. It started. It apparently seems like Snoop was the one who was kind of in his feelings. And does that surprise you to hear that Snoop would react that way to Eminem?
Yeah, I mean, especially, let's look at the whole context. Eminem's lyrics say, "I looked at you as a god." And, you and I spent some time in recent weeks talking about the fact that, 2 Chainz is one of the elite rappers that's yet to have a Jay-Z feature, despite, some overlapping associations with Kanye and Def Jam history, etc. And that hasn't happened yet. And we understand that. But Snoop was on the Marshall Mathers LP with Be Pleased Too, which was, kind of a recycling of Snoop's hit on his own, Top Dog album.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of like a second life to it. And you would think that tribute would be returned. So that doesn't surprise me. And I think that Daz is a credible source. There's one other component that we should say is after Zeus, Snoop responded and called it a soft ass diss.
Yeah.
So it does make sense. And I think over the years there has been a lot of and I'm curious at it too. Like in the business of hip hop, I asked Static Selector, you and I, when we interviewed him, I'm like, how do you say no to people? Whether it's the radio show, whether it's somebody asking for a beat. I'm always fascinated by that because I think in many ways we live in a time when everybody says yes to everything. And there's a few artists that get a pass from that. Jay-Z is one, Dr. Dre is another. And I think Eminem is on that level too. where people expect him to say no. But if he views Snoop in this way, and Eminem is not bound to any contractual obligations that can be overridden, if that's true, I think Snoop's justified. But I don't think that Snoop would let that play into his top 10 list. That's just me, unless he was really that irked that he would be that subjective. What do you think as far as that?
Well, I mean, so there's a couple things, right? In looking at it, so one, there's Snoop, like a dude who has been a legend since 1992, who stayed relevant for now what is coming up on 30, who has had success in multiple decades. It's not like he's standing on his catalog from the 90s. He did it again in the O's, who did it again in the teens. So incredibly relevant, been in films, the whole nine. So Snoop is a legend in his own right. But the second part that makes it even more interesting, and this ties back to the Breakfast Club interview, is that Snoop is a Dre protege, right? Outside of NBA, NWA, Dre's first protege. And so that being the case, they are part of an extended family, the Dr. Dre family. And for Eminem to like say no to a person who's family makes it a little different. You know what I mean? They were not only on that Marshall Mathers LP, they were also on the Chronic 2001, right?
For sure.
I mean, and integral parts of it. I'm sure they shared writing responsibilities, the whole nine. So they go way back on a deep level. So then, to me, it starts to feel a bit more personal that this guy who is in your camp, and as part of the Breakfast Club interview, part of what Snoop says is that the reason why a lot of people are able to put Eminem on their top 10 list is because of Dr. Dre. Dr. Dre established him. Dr. Dre gave him credibility. Dr. Dre made it so that he was not viewed as as a punchline or as a white rapper per se, but as a rapper. And so for you to be part of this movement with someone and to say no, I think that takes it to a different level. And I think that's probably what got under Snoop's skin. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that absolutely makes sense. And, I think we're living in a time now. I mean, we've watched Drake is another good example. Drake comes out and will co-sign. I think it's one of Drake's great attributes is that he is very generous with his co-sign and his feature. We've seen that with 50 Cent too. I don't know that his stock, at least in the rap side, is as high as it was, 5 or 10 years ago. But guys are generous. So the fact that you have Eminem saying no, and that would be a whole different story if there was label politics involved. Dr. Dre stopped producing Snoop at a certain point because Suge Knight was still profiting on those albums. And even still, I think Dre I know he was involved in The Last Meal, which was an album that other people were profiting on. It just seems extra that Eminem would go to the trouble of saying no. And, I understand that there's, artists out there. One of the criticisms Eminem faced from Joe Budden was, where was that look when it counted so much, for Slaughterhouse? Where was that look? You can go through the Shady Records roster. There's a lot of artists that didn't get the Eminem love that even Jay has given some of Rock's artists over the years, whether you're talking about Rockefeller or Rock Nation. So for Eminem to be stingy, it is a little bit suspect. But one thing I'll add is this to me has the setup of an upcoming versus battle all over it to me.
Yeah, I want to get to that in a second. But I want to go back to something you said. You said earlier that you didn't think that even if it was Snoop kind of being in his feelings, he would allow that to affect his top 10 list.
I would hope not. I mean, just as a hip hop head,
well, I agree with that. But here's the interesting thing, and this is the one thing we left off. So in addition to naming kind of his top 10 list, at the end, Snoop punctuated it by saying, but when you're talking about this hip hop shit that I can't live without, I can live without that. Referencing M. Like, right, that was like a little.
Let's put a little mustard on it.
A little extra sauce on it, right? And so, fast forward to New Year's Eve, and Eminem was on a Shade 45 interview. And it was in that interview that this whole thing resurfaced, which is why we're bringing it up now. He said, again, I probably could have gotten past the whole tone and everything, but it was the last statement where he said, far as music I can live without, I can live without that shit. He said, now you're being disrespectful. It just caught me off guard. I wasn't ready for that. So do you think that statement by Snoop was disrespectful?
That's a really good point, and that is let's. I'm sure we can agree that that is very uncharacteristic of Snoop to go that extra mile, especially a post. I mean, early in his career, you know, Snoop had tensions with Luke and Two Live Crew and Tim Dog and, you know, other people. But really, since the late '90s, the only folks that I remember Snoop having major tension with is Suge Knight. So for him to go with, you know, a home team, to your point, guy, and making that point, yeah, suddenly what Daz is saying starts to make sense. I would hope that Snoop wouldn't taint his top 10 that way, but in justifying it, there's a hell of a lot more diplomatic ways to critique M than that.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and so Royce, who was also in that clubhouse room, in response to Daz, you know, it's interesting because they're two kind of proxies, you know, Snoop's proxy and Royce's proxy were kind of defending their performance. And you know, he said, Royce said, or he was of Eminem, he was like, "Damn, that energy was coming off of Snoop in that interview, whether he meant no harm or not. I think he just looked at it like it's a more respectful, brotherly way to say what you said." And but Royce agreed that it didn't have to be a diss song. So, you know, coming back around, we talked about the fact that Eminem has made entire albums, you know, to respond to his detractors. You mentioned Budden. You know, do you think that artists go at Eminem more than they go at other people?
Not these artists. I think that, you know, there's a whole community of new generation, you know, that troll M. I think, you know, we saw a little bit of that with Tyler, the Creator, which was one of the people that M responded to on Kamikaze and in that whole press campaign. You know, Joe definitely, you know, I mean, if Snoop put on mustard, Joe put a whole sandwich into it back in, what was that, 2017 on, you know, both his podcasts and Everyday Struggle. I think M's an easy target because he responds, because he can dedicate an entire direction of an album to responding to his critics. But I don't know that people are hating on Eminem unfairly. I think they're not being the most polite about it, but I think that, you know, I don't know. I mean, M's stock in the game is, you know, that is a great, that is, go ahead.
I'm gonna disagree a little bit.
You would disagree?
I'm gonna disagree. I think that people do go, and I'm not necessarily saying this applies to Snoop or Budden, but I do think that people go at Eminem disproportionately for two reasons. I think you have your camp, and I won't name names, but there are certain people who have been very outspoken about M, you know, for years consistently, because they don't believe that he deserves the accolades that he gets. They think that he gets props because he's white and not because of his skill level. And so there's that camp. But there's also the fact that he is, and I'm not sure this continues, but in the aughts, you know, 2000 and 2010, he was the biggest artist of the decade, not just in hip hop, in all music. He was the biggest artist, and you know, he might still be the most commercially successful rapper of all time. I think that it's probably been eclipsed by Drake at this point, but I'm not sure. But I think that when you are at the top like that in popularity, you know, let's put skill set aside, in popularity,
Okay.
you're a natural target. I think people come for you. Everyone wants to dethrone the king or the queen, and so I do think that people come at him disproportionately.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. You know, one thing that Eminem did is in the early 2010s, you know, those tracks leaked. They never made his albums. I forget whether it was Relapse or Recovery. But, you know, Eminem had made those tracks dissing Lil Wayne, Kanye West at a real kind of pivot point in his career. And they never came out, but then they leaked. And, you know, M used a lot of tactics early in his career on the commercial side whether he was dissing Carson Daly, Christina Aguilera, Britney Spears, Moby. And, you know, that's been the one thing about Eminem is he was happy to give it out when he was this, you know, rascal, really talented lyricist 20 years ago. And we've seen that he is giantly affected when he's on the other side. And, you know, I definitely think Joe Budden was very strategic about that, especially once the horses were out of the barn. But yeah, and one thing I'll say too is we've not seen people come at Nas that way, you know, and we've not seen people come at Jay-Z that way with the exception of maybe The Game. And Eminem is trolled a bit. But in the case of Budden and Snoop, I don't know, they did put a little bit of muscle into it.
Well, so then, okay, that brings me to the other question. You just touched on this a little bit. Is Eminem too sensitive? You mentioned that he was dishing it out before, but it seems like he may be a little bit thin-skinned when it comes back to him. You know, I think part of what you have to develop if you are on top is that thick skin. You have to expect that people are going to come at you. And, you know, I do think that people go at Jay. You know, Drake has had a lot of like sneak disses. There have been, you know, people who got like, you know, obviously the Nas thing. There have been over the years people who came at Jay, but he tends to, I think, stay above the fray a little bit. He doesn't engage that often. Like I can't imagine Jay-Z doing an entire diss album because he just doesn't want to even acknowledge his detractors. Like, you know, like he said at the end of Takeover, like, I only got 2 bars, like, you know, yeah. So, you know, so Jay, you know how he gets down. But it does, to me, seem to affect him differently. So do you think he's too sensitive?
Yeah, and I think Eminem's strongest suit was when he was a funny guy. Like even when he made fun of like Mark Wahlberg and MC Search and Everlast, like when he came at white rappers and other targets early in his career, was funny. And that's Eminem could be cutting and funny, and then all of a sudden we watch things kind of change with Benzino. And you know, you look at a song like what was it, Toy Soldiers, where M's intensity revs up and it's not funny anymore. And I absolutely, you know, all day long think that he beat Benzino in that beef, in that battle. But it's not funny anymore. Like it gets to be too serious. And these days, dissing M, even when it came down to MGK, like the kill shot stuff, it just wasn't a fun beef anymore. It gets to, you know, it's like trash talking in sports. You can get into somebody's head where they're no longer playing the game at the level they're capable of. So to answer your question, I do. And I think Eminem would stand so much more for legacy and career if he would just mute Snoop, if he would have muted Lord Jamar, if he would have muted a lot of the people and just made a dope album. And Kamikaze was cool because it had that whole theme of like, yo, I'm firing back. But here we are 2.5 years later. I know you were a bigger fan than I was of the original, you know, Music to Be Murdered By, but you've already shifted the narrative back to, you know, where things are at with him and Snoop.
Yeah.
And I think now all of a sudden, as M is marching towards 50 years old, you've really got to make another great album to live up to that top 10 legacy, which I'm sure both you and I can agree, and I know a lot of our readers and listeners would agree. Eminem is a great, you know, GOAT level MC, but I want to hear that now. I don't want to keep going back to Marshall Mathers LP and Encore and Slim Shady LP, and I'm getting further and further out where I think it says something that Eminem gave an expanded edition of an album, and I listened to it 1.5 times, and there was great production on there. There was interesting guests, but it's just not how I choose to spend my time. And that's no shots. That's just keeping it a bean.
Yeah. You said you should have muted Snoop, but you also have a theory as to why maybe he's actually amplifying this. So you want to get into that?
Yeah. I mean, we've seen Snoop with verses trying to see like who can I be up against, and Eminem is the best possible opponent for Snoop. I mean, we talked about Snoop versus 50 Cent. I mean, just the grab of that, the diehard fans that are Eminem fans that don't necessarily listen to other hip hop. You know, this could be massive. And people, I heard folks say like, you know, M versus DMX because there was always rumored tensions there, and these guys came up around the same time and both had kind of underground history leading up to their breakthrough. I think because of what you said, the Dr. Dre proteges, it's a really, really interesting battle. And if you really want to stand side by side and say, well, how many really undeniable classic albums are there? How many very good albums? How many misfires? This could be huge. And part of me is just a little bit skeptical. And I'm like, watch this be a press campaign towards a versus.
Yeah. You know, I think it could be a cool battle if if you were comparing their 2000s output. But as we talked about, Snoop precedes M by a good 7 years or so in terms of like public facing material. And so I'm not even sure that that would be the appropriate battle. I start to think about Snoop and who's had that kind of longevity. And I think an interesting pairing would be Busta Rhymes, because you think about,
Yeah.
when Leaders kind of came out, like 91 or so, Snoop 92, and Busta definitely had that longevity. I think about a Nas, who came out just a couple years later from Snoop, and
Yeah.
has had that kind of longevity. Um, so I'm not sure. I'm not sold on the notion of it being a versus. I think it would be massive if it was, but I'm not. I think this is deeper than that. So on Tuesday there was an Instagram post on a page called Rap Cipher 3, where they posted a picture of Snoop, M, and Dre, one of the rare pictures of them of M and Snoop together, and the caption said, "I wonder what changed." And Snoop apparently weighed in saying, "Nothing, we good." So people are taking that as an end to the beef. So far, Eminem has not responded. So we shall see.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm just a skeptic of this, and it hasn't gotten sloppy. It's there's clearly hurt feelings. There's some bias here, but I really predict, and I think that it would be a testament to verses. Um, and if I'm not mistaken, I mean both of these guys have worked with Timberland. I'm not sure about Swiss Beats, but if that platform starts to become real time history, I think we all were fascinated at the dynamics of Gucci Mane and Jeezy. But to watch a battle that the public thinks is brewing and be settled with old school versus, and these guys dap it up on stage and do Be Pleased 2 together. That just feels to me like what hip hop promo looks like in 2021. I hope I'm right. I hope I'm right because I mean these guys made history together. To your point, on Dre's 2001, on the Up and Smoke tour, they are goats in their own right, and I just hate to see this go foul.
Yeah. No, it would be crazy. It would be very wily, very clever, very crazy if it was a versus, but we'll see. But taking it back to the root, Dr. Dre, there was some scary news about him about a week or so ago. Was admitted to the hospital with an aneurysm, but he's been released now and is back at home. So that's a great update from that. He hasn't said anything publicly, but through spokespeople, we do
I
know
saw
that.
Ice-T said he FaceTime with them and he's in good health, and
Yeah, and getting care 24/7 there. So yeah, 55 years old, man. Dr. Dre, still strong. So
yeah, great to see. And aneurysm. I lost my grandmother to an aneurysm, and I think everybody I talk to, I mean, and those are things that are not as preventative as other health issues. And we all know, we've all watched Dr. Dre's health journey in real time. I mean, he's in better shape now than he was, around Deep Cover. So I'm hoping it's just up and up from here, and maybe he'll do an interview soon and fill the fans in on what we want to know.
yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned Deep Cover because those lyrics, that famous hook, because it's 187 on an undercover cop. um, you know, um, is actually, ties perfectly with the next topic, which is rappers are actually starting to go to jail for their lyrics. So imagine if Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre had been convicted of inciting murder on police because of that. Well, we're very, very dangerously close to that happening now. There are several rappers, maybe hundreds, that have now been convicted due to their lyrics. It's interesting because for me, I did my third year, my law school thesis was on this. Back in 1994, Tupac was on trial. There was a man named Ronald Ray Howard who was shot and killed a Texas state trooper named Bill Davidson. And at the time he was pulled over, he was listening to Tupac's Soldier Story, which was about a black man being pulled over by the police and then shooting and killing the person that pulled him over. And so he said that Tupac's song had incited him to killing the state trooper, and it was being used as a defense for him. And also later on, the family of the state trooper used that song to try and sue Tupac and Interscope, for being liable for the death of the officer. My paper was really on a couple of things. One, that Tupac's music should be protected by the First Amendment, because the First Amendment protects free speech against criminal prosecution and against civil liability. And this is something that had been well established in music for decades. Back in the 80s, there were songs by Ozzy Osbourne and Judas Priest that people had said had caused teens to kill themselves. Ozzy Osbourne's song was called "Suicide Solution." It had hidden lyrics in it like "Get the gun and try it," "Shoot, shoot, shoot." Those were dismissed though, because again, the First Amendment protects any kind of speech, whether it be you and me talking in a film, in art, in music, against prosecution, criminal or civil. Fast forward to 2017, however, and the issue starts to resurface. There's a guy named Lawrence Montague who was in jail awaiting sentencing or awaiting trial for murder and gun-related charges, and he rapped a verse to a friend on the phone in prison. That verse was recorded, and it was used to convict him and imprison him for 50 years. His appeal was recently denied by the Supreme Court. Which means that this is a precedent now that can affect anyone. And typically what happens is once that's set, then people will cite that case that was denied and use it as a means for convicting people all across the country. One of the craziest examples of it was this guy, Jamal Knox, who went by the name of Mayhem Mall. And you and I covered this back in 2016 or so. He was a Pennsylvania man who was convicted in 2013 of 2 counts of terroristic threats and 2 counts of witness intimidation. He had another song called "Fuck the Police." And he had been out on bond in a drug case, and he released a song about the 2 that could have been about the 2 arresting officers. But that song was then used to convict him of those 2 things. And Killer Mike, Chance the Rapper, Meek Mill, Yo Gotti, Fat Joe, 21 Savage, and others supported an amicus brief. And what that is you can write a brief pleading a case and citing why a case should be decided one way or another, and submit it on behalf of someone, even if you're not a party to the actual case, just in support of it. And so they did that to the Supreme Court because they obviously understand what's at stake and how important it is for speech to be protected, particularly for artists. And in 2019, the Supreme Court declined to hear that case, which is effectively saying that that case was decided in the correct way as well. So we're now in a place where, unlike any other form of art, music, film, television, whatever, rap music is being used to convict the people who create it. And it's an insane thing when you think about it. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have the legal background, but they've been using rap lyrics for character portrayals for years. Like, prosecuting attorneys, anytime an artist of profiles up there, whenever they can, will use lyrics to try to say, like, this is who this person is. Correct me if I'm wrong with that, right?
6ix9ine case is probably the most
Yeah.
profile. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean this is happening, and it's very concerning at the same time that, so I do a lot of bio work with a lot of artists, especially, you know, upstart artists, a lot of these guys from the south side of Chicago, and I'm finding out that there's a lot of declarations in music where artists are incriminating themselves, and you have that at the same time that the legal system is expanding to convict artists for their lyrics. I'm really concerned, and I don't know that this will be happening to, you know, the type of MCs that you and I listen to on the daily, but just for what rap music means, what it represents, the stuff that makes news on the New York Times, Washington Post, Good Morning America, I'm really concerned because, yeah, this is happening at a time when artists are becoming famous by saying that they did things that are violent and illegal in the street. But yeah, I'm really just concerned, for lack of a better.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, it just speaks to so many things. First, it's clearly there are clear racist implications here. You know, rap is
Sure.
obviously predominantly done by Black artists, so there's no other justification for singling out this particular.
Ozzy and
Yeah,
and Judas Priest never served time,
yeah,
right?
absolutely. And Johnny Cash has made songs about murder. There are tons and tons of artists in other genres who make songs about murdering people, who are not held accountable for these things. And it's also holding rap music to a completely different literal standard. Like, if every single thing that a rapper said was supposed to be taken literally, then every single, just like 95% of rappers should be in jail. Because according to songs of committed crimes, they, every dude has had sex with every other dude's woman. Like, I mean, there's all sorts of like
Yeah.
absurd implications when you take it to its logical extent. Um, but it just speaks to just kind of where we are, as a country. It's just reminders, and the only exception to the protection of the First Amendment is if you are specifically inciting violence. So if
Well,
you,
that's the terroristic threats, right?
yeah, so if you tell someone to go and kill this person right now, like, or you scream fire in the theater or something like that.
Or you tell somebody to march to the Capitol building on Twitter.
Exactly. Exactly. Those are the kind of things that then are not subject to First Amendment protection.
Yeah.
But just talking about something general, or saying something that's fantasy, or thinking, saying your thoughts out loud of what you'd like to happen. You might be pissed at a police officer or whatever, and you wish something upon them. That is not the same thing as inciting violence on that person. And
Right.
so, you should be protected by the First Amendment for that.
Yeah, I mean, I always think is interesting, and Jay Prince was talking about this on Drink Champs. I mean, for years, the Ghetto Boys were the microphone that Jay Prince, who wasn't a rapper, although he rapped at times on interludes and stuff, but he would literally name the prosecuting attorneys, the investigators in Houston. Like, that was a case but it wasn't like, we're going to do harm to this person. It was just a reflection of life,
Yeah.
and yeah,
So, I mean, imagine a world where MCs are not able to talk about anything that might implicate them or subject them to criminal prosecution.
right.
It radically changes what artists are able to talk about in their music. The entire gangster rap genre is gone. Reality
Yeah.
rap, reality rap, what kids are talking about, from Lil Baby to, Dub Baby to whoever, like, entire genres are wiped off the map. There's no talk about, drug use. There's no talk about,
Yeah.
like, anything that could be criminal. And so that's a very, very dangerous place to be. And again, it doesn't apply to film. You can have,
And that's the whole thing. If this was a level playing field and they were doing it with country, or they were doing it with film, if they were doing it with literature, if they were doing, but it's just singling out rap as
yeah,
we know it right now.
yeah. So people should be alarmed. People should be really kind of up in arms about this. writing to the Congress people, because once you start to like cut off people's free speech, you just don't know. You never know where it's going to stop. There's this term called slippery slope, and you start with a thing that seems like it's not a big deal, and you keep going, and eventually you find yourself in a really kind of draconian system. So, yeah.
Yeah. I hope people wake up, and I'm actually going to take the pledge. I've been writing politicians more than ever. I'm gonna do my part with that too, and I'm sure there's those things out there that already have the email drafted just to let them know that you care about it.
Yeah. So we lost another hip hop icon this week. Yeah, someone we had just been talking about. I think it was last week, right?
Yeah, you brought up his name
Yeah,
in the podcast last week.
Duke Booty,
Yeah,
who was part of Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five.
aka Edward Fletcher. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Part of the message. Died this would do any. Do you know the cause of death or?
Yeah, I just Rolling Stone did a really nice tribute that I read this morning, and it was end stage congestive heart failure. He was 69 years old, and I learned a lot from that article. That honestly, I really salute the people that properly cover our pioneers. And Jay Quan, whose videos we've supported a lot over the years, has a really, I say homemade, and that doesn't do it justice, but it uses a lot of found footage to tell Duke's story. I would encourage anyone to listen and watch that, because this guy's the architect of the message, which I know is, a song that you and I both hold in the highest regard.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I didn't realize this either, but he was a member of the Sugar Hill house band. So as we all know, like Sugar Hill Records, they played over, even with like Chic Good Times. Those were bands in the studio that were recreating kind of the ahead of sampling, and he was a key member of that.
And this happened, unfortunately, right before Grandmaster Flash and Furious Five were going to get their Lifetime Achievement Grammy, right?
Yeah, get that Grammy, and yeah, it's really, really sad to see. He was 69 years old, and there's just been so much loss going on.
Yeah. So we got some new music coming out. Benny Plugs 2. That's still my favorite album from Benny, Plugs I Met.
Okay.
I love Burden of Proof, but Plugs I Met is still my joint. But Plugs I Met 2 is coming out March 19th, produced entirely by Harry Fraud.
We're going off a tweet right now, but I thought that was really interesting because obviously Plugs I Met 1 was not one, wasn't a single producer. I believe it was, DJ Shay, R.I.P., Derringer. I want to say Beat Butcher had a joint on there. And, so to see Harry Fraud, who's not somebody that we associate as full-on Griselda projects, but is, a great producer, Brooklyn native, done crazy joints with Action Bronson, French Montana, a whole host of these projects with Currency, including a really dope one last year, Outrunners. So yeah, that's something to look forward to. And we're 2 months out from that. And and Benny on top of it made the Buffalo Bills fight song, and maybe that's the winning charm, because the Bills are 2 wins deep in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think Benny sounds phenomenal on Derringer beats, obviously an Alchemist. I think the two of them have a similar kind of chemistry, and Harry Fraud to me fits in that same kind of family, like dark chords and like kind of eerie beats and real soulful. So
Harry samples, which I love, and at the same time, he was a guy who clearly studied the Petes and the Premiers and the RZAs and all the OGs. But even in the early 2010s, when he was working with French and Bronson and all those people, he was very contemporary too, and really wasn't trying to just copy them, but come with his own lane. So I hope we get a single ahead of this project. To your point, Plugs I Met is a sacred brand in the Griselda, Black Soprano family catalog. So yeah, something that's probably the release that's announced right now that I'm looking most forward to.
Yeah. And Drake is supposed to be coming out. A lot of people thought that would be this month. We've only got 2 weeks left. Of course, Benny and Drake have that track together that a lot of people are waiting for. I can't wait to hear that track, actually, because I want to hear whether Benny is moving more, toward Drake's lane, or Drake is moving more towards Benny's lane. Because Drake has done that in the past too. It's not like people just meld themselves to Drake. Like on Stay Scheming, Drake sounded like straight MMG on that song. So
Right.
I want to hear what that song sounds like. It's going to be really, really
Drake's generous like that. I expect that as well. Drake is also appearing next month on an artist with a similar name that's also, I think, been held to a standard because of his rap content. Draco the Roller, who got out of prison last year, and Drake. And it's funny too. I mean, completely independent artist out of the streets of LA. And Drake said, "Yo, I'm a fan of what you're doing. I'm a fan of this whole movement." That those guys are part of, and that feature is going to be coming to the surface soon. I saw he's been talking about that. So yeah, Drake's going to be making his rounds, and undeniably has his own project in tow as well.
Yeah, and some older music has resurfaced. Doom, there's obviously no surprise, but his music is up significantly, 800%
Yeah.
streams. I listened to a great Stretch and Bobbito podcast on Apple Music where they mix in a lot of Doom classics, KMD remixes, freestyles, but then also like they have sound bites of people who were significant in Doom's life, just telling stories about like Prince Paul and people like that, just telling stories about how they hung out with him and just wild things. It's really a great listen. About 2 hours of work every week.
Oh, I need to check that out for sure. And it's funny, the count that Hip Hop DX reported earlier in the week was 800% increase in streams. I look at and I know to your point at the beginning of the podcast, not a lot of stuff comes out in January, it seems, but I mentioned this last week. I mean, Doom has been heavy rotation for me, and not just the big projects, but to see the features he did, to see those projects under other names like King Ghidra and Victor Vaughn. And I've been listening to a lot of Third Base too, and really kind of trying to hear what Doom spawned out of, in part with KMD. So yeah, good to see. And then the other thing is it's dope that an album that you and I both love. You've done some tremendous writing on it. Good Kid, Mad City, Kendrick's major label debut, snuck back into the charts very well, thanks to a vinyl release. And I know one of the arching stories over the years is CDs might be dead, but vinyl isn't. I just like to know that people are out there putting their dollars up for great music, and to see Kendrick prove that 8+ years later, his album, will still send people out to the stores or to websites to buy it is great.
Yeah, it's crazy. I didn't realize that the album has been on the Billboard 200 basically since it dropped. It's the longest standing album on the Billboard 200, rap album ever on the Billboard 200.
Damn!
I knew. When the first time I heard it, I remember vividly where I was sitting in my spot in New Rochelle on the couch, and I was working very closely with TDE at the time. It was a BET. I remember texting Dave Free and saying to him that just how blown away I was, because I'd heard Swimming Pools and the other songs, and I was a huge Kendrick fan. Section 80 was already one of my favorite rap albums of all time.
Agreed.
But when I sat and listened to Good Kid, Mad City on my headphones in the dark, which is how I love to really digest a critical album, I just was blown away with how good it was. Like I just texted him how it just I didn't expect it to be that good. And so Kendrick was coming in that Tuesday to promote the album, and so I went, and it was the last CD I bought with my own money. I went to the record store, the Best Buy, I think up the street, bought it, and came back because I wanted him to sign it for me, and he signed it, and I have that in a frame along with, I bought vinyl, two copies of the vinyl.
Oh damn!
Frame, with the note and everything. So it's really dope, kind of tribute to that album. But yeah, one of my favorite albums of all time. Obviously a classic at this point. I wrote in the very beginning, within a couple of days, that we should call it a classic, and I think it's pretty undisputed at this point. But yeah, really great to see that album continue to get recognition.
Yeah, man. The week or two after that dropped, I was editor in chief at DX at the time, and I was in LA. Went to a Clippers game, and Kendrick was sitting a couple rows in front of me with Top and with what is it, Steve Berman, the Interscope executive that plays Jerry Heller in the Dre Day video.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was funny too, because I'd spoken and had some association, and Wale was just like a few seats down from him too. It was a good game. But I just remember like that album had come out and I was watching an artist in real time. And in my mind, I'm thinking, can this guy come to every Lakers and Clippers game like this anymore? And the beautiful thing is 8 years later, Kendrick's still himself, one of the least changed by fame artists that seems to me at a distance out. But I'm glad that album still continues to resonate and penetrate.
Word. So, any new music that's caught your attention? It's been real slow. Like I haven't been digging into new music, but any new music caught your attention?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give a shout out to two releases that I dug. Our man Oswin Benjamin came out with a joint called "Joy Comes in the Morning," and I'll be real with you. I saw Oswin at Soundset in 2019. Always knew he was a talented MC. We covered him a lot on AFH. Great with the freestyle. Some memorable appearances on Sway in the Morning. I had no idea that he could sing, and that was one of the things you and I talked about with the Locks last year, because they had him on one of my favorite songs on their album. And Joy Comes in the Morning. It's a really thematic joint, and it's got Robert Glasper all up on it too on several tracks. 7 on 7 with him. That's the one that I would suggest anyone to encourage. But Oswin's completely independent, extremely talented, and I've been jamming that a bit. And the other one is, people know Kev Brown. He's was part of the that crew out of the DMV that Odyssey was part of. Peter Rosenberg, I think Low Budget Crew. And, Kev got a lot of headlines years ago when he remixed the Black album as the Brown album. And he's done great production with Jazzy Jeff and Freddie Fox and different people. But he's worked with Jay Cyanide, who's an artist we covered on AFH. And they have a new album called Straight from the Pack. It's out on Fat Beats. And just really good hip hop. And I would encourage everyone to join on there. It's Cutlass Supreme. I'm a car guy. There's dope artwork on that one. But that's a really good album for folks that are beat heads and just like purist DITC type hip hop.
That's dope. I'm a huge fan of Kev Brown. I love the Brown album. And a big fan of Oswin Benjamin too. I saw him at an A3 showcase. I think it was like 2015, maybe 2016. And it was at nighttime early, it was pouring down raining. There were probably like 10 people out, and it was like maybe 20, and it was like the big stage, but he was rocking like it was 5,000 people.
That's dope.
That always impresses me. I've seen a couple artists do that. Dizzy Wright is another one, and whenever I see artists do that, it just like it takes my respect level to a whole different level for them, because it just shows how seriously they take the craft. So yeah, shout out to him. Really dope. So looking forward to that. So
yeah, play that one. Oswin is truly underrated MC.
Yeah. So what's your song of the week?
Man, I'm in Memphis, Tennessee today. I got up this morning. It was very powerful. I walk these dogs that will not shut up, and I'm sorry to every listener that's got a chirp in their ear now. But I'm literally across the street from the Lorraine Motel. So, I've been playing a lot of Memphis music the last 24 hours. So I'm going to give it up to 8 Ball and MJG, Coming Out Hard. That's my joint since I'm in Memphis. What about you?
Yeah, Theo's loving or is that Theo or is that the other one?
Nah, this is Morgie. He's a little guy. He's loud in the fight, and yeah. I'm at a spot that is dog friendly. So there's a lot of action going on that I don't know about, but with their ears and noses. But man, he is chirping. When he chirps, yeah. Theo walk slow, carry a big stick. But anyway, over to you.
Morgan loves 8 Ball and MJG too. I can see it. So, for me, man, I gotta go back to 2010. I was listening to J Rock's Hood Gonna Love It. And I just had it on the radio playlist of it, and a
Yeah.
song from Wiz Khalifa's "Cushion Orange Juice" came up,
Ooh.
and so I went back and have been listening to that, and I'm gonna give it up to Spotlight from Cushion OJ about Wiz
Oh
Khalifa.
wow.
The song is like,
man,
just hitting me. So yeah. Shout out to Wiz.
If it's 2010, man, you should put on like a real bright colored hoodie, some real tight pants today. You know, go out and relive that year. You know.
All right. Well, yeah, it was good.
Yo, man.
And look forward to the next time.
Yeah, man. Me too.
All right. Peace.
Peace, man.